I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, and my hands will not stop shaking. The cheap mattress dips beneath me, springs protesting with that familiar creak that has become the soundtrack to my sleepless nights. My phone rests face up on the wrinkled sheets beside me, the blue glow casting harsh shadows across my knuckles. The last message I sent still burns on the screen. I didn't mean for it to go that far. But that's a lie. I meant every second of it. Outside, the city hums its restless lullaby. A car door slams somewhere down the block. The neighbors upstairs are having another argument, their voices bleeding through the paper-thin walls of this rundown apartment building where Nathaniel and I have lived together for 8 months now. The woman's laughter cuts through the darkness, sharp and bitter, and I wonder if she's laughing at the same kind of lie I just told myself. I touch my lips with trembling fingers, and the memory crashes over me like a wave I'm not strong enough to fight. His nervous smile, the way he fidgeted with the sleeves of his oversized sweater, pulling them down over his hands the way he always does when he's anxious. The fluorescent light above our tiny kitchen flickering on and off, casting us in alternating moments of clarity and shadow. And his voice, softer than I'd ever heard it before, asking me something that should have been simple but felt like stepping off a cliff. Would you help me practice kissing? The question had hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to ignore and equally impossible to take back. I should have laughed it off. I should have made some joke about how ridiculous it was, how we were 22 years old and past the age of needing practice for something so basic. I should have suggested he figure it out with the girl from his acting class, the one who'd been texting him all week about their upcoming date. But instead, I said yes. I remember the exact moment I nodded, the way his eyes widened just a fraction, as if he hadn't actually expected me to agree. The silence that followed stretched between us like a tightrope, and we were both afraid to take the first step across it. He moved closer to me, hesitant, his socks sliding against the linoleum floor of our kitchen. The refrigerator hummed beside us, a constant buzz that seemed louder than it had any right to be. The first kiss was awkward, clumsy. He tilted his head the wrong way, and our noses bumped, and we both started laughing because what else do you do when you're 22 and pretending that what you're about to do doesn't matter? The laughter died quickly, though, suffocated by something heavier settling over us. He tried again. This time, he moved slower. His hand came up to cup my jaw, fingers warm against my skin, thumb brushing just below my ear. His breath smelled like the peppermint tea he'd been drinking while studying for his theater history exam, sweet and familiar and so distinctly him that my chest tightened. When his lips touched mine, there was nothing clumsy about it, nothing uncertain. And I kissed him back. I kissed him back like I'd been waiting my entire life for permission. Like every careful distance I'd maintained between us for the past 3 years of our friendship had been a dam holding back something too powerful to contain. His mouth was soft and warm, and when he made that small sound in the back of his throat, something inside me broke open. The kiss deepened. His other hand found my waist, fingers curling into my shirt, pulling me closer. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, fast and desperate, matching the frantic rhythm of my own. Time folded in on itself. The kitchen disappeared. The flickering light above us could have burned out entirely, and I wouldn't have noticed. When I finally pulled back, gasping, his eyes were still closed. His lips were slightly parted, swollen from kissing, and there was a flush across his cheekbones that made him look younger somehow. Vulnerable, beautiful in a way that hurt to witness. "That's enough," I had whispered, the words scraping against my throat like broken glass. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Now I sit here in the darkness of my room, staring at my reflection in the cheap mirror mounted above my dresser. The face looking back at me is familiar but foreign, like seeing a photograph of yourself from an angle you've never seen before. My lips are still tender. My hair is still messed up from where his fingers ran through it during those final moments when we stopped pretending this was practice and started admitting it was something else entirely. I look for answers in my own eyes, searching for some sign of what I'm supposed to do next. How do you go back to being just friends with someone after you've tasted what it might feel like to be more. How do you share a tiny apartment and split the grocery bills and argue over whose turn it is to do the dishes when you've spent the evening learning the exact way he sighs when you kiss the spot just below his ear? My phone buzzes against the mattress, and my heart jumps into my throat. For a wild moment, I think it might be him responding to my text, telling me that he didn't mean for it to go that far either. Or maybe telling me the opposite. Maybe telling me he meant every second of it too. And what are we going to do about that? But when I pick up the phone, it's just a notification about an assignment due tomorrow for my graphic design class. The mundane reality of school and deadlines and a life that continues to exist outside of what happened in our kitchen feels almost absurd. How can the world keep turning when everything inside me has shifted? I set the phone aside and lie back on my bed, staring up at the water stain on the ceiling that's been growing larger since we moved in. Nathaniel is probably in his room right now, just 20 feet away through our shared wall. I wonder if he's lying awake too, staring at his own ceiling, touching his own lips, trying to make sense of what we've done. The apartment is quiet now, except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of the building settling. But the silence feels different than it did this morning. This morning, the silence was comfortable, familiar, filled with the easy companionship we'd built over years of friendship. Now it feels loaded, pregnant with possibility and terror in equal measure. I close my eyes and try to push the memory away, but it clings to me like smoke. Every detail is vivid, immediate. The way he looked at me afterward, eyes wide and searching. The way neither of us spoke for several long moments, just standing there in the kitchen with the space between us feeling both too vast and not nearly vast enough. The way he finally cleared his throat and said he should probably call a night, his voice rough around the edges. The way I watched him walk to his room and close the door behind him, and how the soft click of the latch sounded like the most final thing I'd ever heard. I am 22 years old, and I am in love with my best friend, and I have no idea what to do about either of those things. The realization sits heavy in my chest, a weight I've been carrying for so long I'd almost forgotten it was there. But tonight, after what happened in the kitchen, there's no ignoring it anymore. Tomorrow, we'll have to see each other. We'll have to figure out how to exist in the same space, how to make coffee and share the bathroom and pretend that everything is exactly the same as it was yesterday. We'll have to decide whether to talk about what happened or pretend it never did. But tonight, I am alone with the truth of it, and my hands are still shaking, and I can still taste peppermint tea on my lips. Our apartment is the kind of place that college seniors end up in when they can't afford anything better but refuse to live in the dorms for another year. The walls are painted an institutional beige that looks gray in certain light, and there's a persistent dampness that makes everything smell faintly of mildew no matter how many candles we burn or windows we crack open. The kitchen faucet drips constantly, a steady rhythm that becomes white noise after a while. The refrigerator is ancient and loud, cycling on and off with mechanical groans that shake the thin walls. But it's ours. Nathaniel and I found this place 8 months ago, splitting the rent down the middle, even though his room is slightly larger and gets better light. We'd spent an entire weekend driving around the neighborhoods near campus, looking at one depressing option after another, until we walked into this cramped 2-bedroom, and something just clicked. Maybe it was the way the late afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows, or how the hardwood floors creaked in a way that felt lived in rather than broken down. Or maybe we were just tired of looking, ready to settle for good enough. The living room doubles as our study space, our dining room, our entertainment center. There's a couch we found at a thrift store, brown corduroy with cushions that sag in the middle, positioned directly in front of a television that's older than we are. The coffee table is actually a storage ottoman we bought on sale, and it's covered with textbooks, empty coffee mugs, and whatever homework we've abandoned mid-task. 2 mismatched lamps provide most of our lighting because the overhead fixture stopped working sometime before we moved in, and neither of us has bothered to fix it. Our kitchen is barely large enough for 2 people to occupy at the same time. We've learned to navigate around each other in a careful dance, stepping sideways to let the other person reach the stove, automatically moving our bodies to create space when someone needs to open the refrigerator. The counter space is limited, so we keep our dishes to a minimum and wash them immediately after eating. The cabinets are painted white but chipped in places, revealing layers of paint underneath, like geological strata. This is where we've built our small life together, where we've learned each other's routines and rhythms. I know that Nathaniel drinks his coffee black in the morning, but adds cream in the afternoon. He knows that I leave my graphic design projects spread across the kitchen table for days at a time, sketching and re-sketching until something finally feels right. We've developed an unspoken system for groceries, bills, and cleaning that works mostly because we both hate confrontation and would rather adapt than argue. I study graphic design because it seemed practical when I was 18, and choosing a major felt like the most important decision I'd ever make. Now, 3.5 years later, I realize I chose it not because it inspired me, but because it felt safe, predictable, something I could be competent at without having to risk too much of myself. My projects are technically proficient, but rarely exceptional. My professors give me B+ grades and comment about pushing myself creatively, taking more risks, finding my unique voice. But the truth is, I'm not sure I have a unique voice, or if I do, I'm terrified of what it might sound like. Nathaniel, on the other hand, chose theater because he couldn't imagine doing anything else. He's 21, 11 months younger than me, though he's always seemed more mature in some ways and heartbreakingly young in others. When he talks about acting, his whole face changes. His eyes light up, his hands move as he speaks, and you can see the passion burning just beneath the surface of his skin. He can quote entire scenes from plays I've never heard of, and he has opinions about directors and acting techniques that he'll defend with surprising intensity. But he's also deeply insecure in ways that would surprise anyone who's only seen him on stage. In class or at auditions, he transforms into someone confident and magnetic. At home, though, he second-guesses himself constantly. He practices his lines in the mirror for hours, changing his inflection, adjusting his posture, never quite satisfied with his performance. He laughs when he's nervous, which is often. He pulls his sleeves down over his hands when he's anxious, a habit he's had since childhood. People assume he's effortlessly charismatic because that's what he projects when he needs to, but I know the work that goes into that projection. I watched him pace our living room before auditions, running his hands through his hair until it sticks up at odd angles. I've seen him hang up after phone calls with his parents, his shoulders sagging with the weight of their expectations. His mother wants him to switch to business. His father thinks theater is a hobby, not a career. But I also know the way his face looks when he comes home after a good rehearsal, flushed with excitement and possibility. I know how he moves through our apartment when he's working on a character, unconsciously adopting different postures and vocal patterns. I know that he practices his warm-up exercises in the shower every morning, his voice echoing off the bathroom tiles and scales and tongue twisters that become part of the apartment's soundtrack. We've lived in each other's pockets for months now, sharing this small space with its thin walls and leaky faucets and windows that stick when you try to open them. We've fallen into routines that feel almost domestic. Movie nights on our sagging couch, sharing a blanket because the heat is expensive and neither of us wants to deal with a higher utility bill. Cooking together in our tiny kitchen, bumping shoulders, and automatically moving around each other in that careful choreography we've developed. There are nights when we fall asleep studying, textbooks scattered across the coffee table, and I wake up to find his head on my shoulder or his arm draped across my legs. There are mornings when I'm rushing to get ready for class and he's still in bed, hair messy against his pillow, and I have to resist the urge to brush it away from his forehead. These small intimacies have become so natural, so woven into the fabric of our friendship, that I'd almost forgotten they weren't normal. That most friends don't share space quite like this, don't know each other's breathing patterns or the exact way someone sighs when they're frustrated with an assignment. But now, after what happened in the kitchen, every one of these moments feels different, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. It happens on a Tuesday night in October, The kind of evening when the air outside carries the first real bite of autumn and the radiator in our apartment clanks to life for the first time since spring. I'm sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by sketches for a logo design that's due tomorrow morning when Nathaniel comes home for rehearsal. His cheeks are flushed from the cold walk across campus, and his hair is damp with mist from the rain that's been threatening all day but never quite materializing. He drops his backpack by the door with more force than necessary, and I can tell immediately that something is wrong. His shoulders are tight, his movements sharp and agitated in a way that usually means he's had a difficult rehearsal or gotten feedback that stung more than he expected. But when I look up from my work and ask him how it went, he just shakes his head and mutters that it was fine, which is Nathaniel speak for anything but fine. He moves around the kitchen with restless energy, opening the refrigerator and staring into it without taking anything out, filling the kettle for tea but forgetting to turn on the burner, running his hands through his hair until it sticks up at odd angles. I've seen him like this before, usually before big auditions or when he's gotten a particularly brutal critique from one of his professors. The best thing to do is usually to give him space to work through whatever is bothering him, but tonight feels different. Tonight, the energy radiating off him is almost electric, charged with something I can't quite identify. I close my sketchbook and turn in my chair to face him fully. "What's wrong?" I ask, and he stops his restless movement long enough to look at me. His eyes are brighter than usual, whether from the cold outside or something else entirely. I can't tell. He tells me about Sarah, the girl from his acting class who's been texting him for weeks. She's pretty, he says, and smart, and she laughs at his jokes even when they're not particularly funny. They've been talking after class, grabbing coffee sometimes, sharing complaints about their scene study professor who has impossibly high standards and a tendency to reduce students to tears. She asked him out, finally, after weeks of what Nathaniel now realizes was probably flirtation that went completely over his head at the time. They're supposed to go out tomorrow night. Dinner at that Italian place near campus, then maybe a movie if things go well. It should be simple, straightforward, the kind of first date that happens thousands of times every day on college campuses across the country. But Nathaniel is pacing our kitchen like a caged animal, pulling at his sleeves and laughing at inappropriate moments, which means he's more nervous than he wants to admit. The problem, he tells me, stopping abruptly in front of the sink and gripping the counter with both hands, is that he doesn't know what he's doing. Not really. He's 21 years old, and he's never been on what he considers a real date. There have been parties where he's kissed people, fumbling encounters fueled by cheap beer and the kind of desperate loneliness that comes with being away from home for the first time. But those don't count, he says. Those were just practice. He turns to face me, and there's something vulnerable in his expression that makes my chest tighten. He's afraid he's going to mess it up, he says. Afraid he's going to do something wrong or awkward or embarrassing. Afraid Sarah is going to realize that despite his confidence on stage, despite the way he can transform into different characters with apparent ease, he's actually just a kid from a small town in Ohio who has no idea how to navigate the complexities of adult relationships. "I don't know what to kiss," he says, and the words hang in the air between us like smoke. I don't know how to kiss. Not really. Not in a way that matters. The admission seems to surprise him as much as it surprises me. His eyes widen slightly, as if he hadn't meant to say it out loud. And for a moment, we just stare at each other across our tiny kitchen while the refrigerator hums and the radiator clanks and the world outside continues its relentless forward motion. I could laugh it off. I could tell him he's being ridiculous, that he's 21 years old, and kissing is one of those things you figure out as you go, that Sarah probably won't judge him if he's not perfect right away. I could suggest he watch some tutorials online or read an article about it, turn the whole thing into a joke that we'll laugh about later. Instead, I hear myself saying, "I could help you practice." The words leave my mouth before I fully realize I'm going to say them. And once they're out there, hanging in the space between us, there's no taking them back. Nathaniel's eyes widen, and I can see him processing what I've just offered, trying to decide if I'm serious or if this is some elaborate setup for a joke that hasn't landed yet. "You would do that?" he asks, and his voice is quieter than it was a moment ago. "You would really do that?" It's not really a question, but I nod anyway. My heart is beating so fast I'm sure he can hear it, but I force my voice to stay steady as I tell him that's what friends are for, right? Helping each other out, making sure we don't embarrass ourselves in front of people we're trying to impress. He considers this for a long moment, chewing on his bottom lip in that way he does when he's thinking hard about something. The kitchen feels smaller than usual, the air thicker, and I'm acutely aware of every sound. The drip of the faucet, the hum of the fluorescent light above us, the soft whistle of wine through the gap in the window frame. Okay, he says finally. Okay, yes. That would be really helpful. He moves closer to me, hesitant, and I stand up from my chair, so we're facing each other properly. The table is between us, covered with my abandoned sketches, but somehow the distance feels both too vast and not nearly enough. He's tall enough that I have to tilt my head back slightly to meet his eyes, and when I do, I see something there that makes my breath catch in my throat. This is just practice, he says, but there's a question in his voice, like he's asking for confirmation rather than stating a fact. Just practice. I agree, though the words taste like a lie even as they leave my mouth. He reaches across the table and takes my hand, his fingers warm against mine, and I realize that we've crossed some invisible line that I never even saw coming. There's no going back from here, no pretending this is just another ordinary Tuesday night in our cramped apartment with its leaky faucets and thin walls. Show me, he says, and his voice is barely above a whisper. The days that follow exist in a strange, suspended state, like the moments between lightning and thunder when the whole world holds its breath. Nathaniel goes on his date with Sarah. He comes home that Friday night around 11:30, his hair damp from the rain that started while they were walking back to her dorm. I'm pretending to read on the couch when he walks through the door, but really I've been staring at the same page for the past 2 hours, my mind unable to focus on anything except the image of him sitting across from another person in that Italian restaurant, making conversation and laughing at her jokes. He tells me it went well. She's funny, he says, kicking off his shoes and hanging his jacket on the back of one of our kitchen chairs. Really funny. And she liked the movie they saw afterward, some independent film about a musician in New York that was playing at the campus theater. They talked about it over coffee afterward, dissecting the cinematography and the soundtrack, finding common ground in their shared love of stories told through unconventional narratives. I nod and make appropriate sounds of interest, but there's something hollow in his voice that wasn't there before. Something careful and measured, like he's reciting lines from a script rather than sharing genuine excitement about an evening with someone he likes. When he asks if I want to hear the details, I tell him I'm tired and should probably get to bed soon. The lie tastes bitter on my tongue, but it's easier than sitting here listening to him describe kissing someone else with a mouth that I could still feel pressed against mine. But if Nathaniel went through the motions of a successful first date, something fundamental has shifted in the space between us. The easy comfort we've always shared has been replaced by something more complex, more charged. We move around each other differently now, hyper-aware of proximity and touch in ways that make simple interactions feel loaded with significance. He brushes past me in the narrow hallway between our bedrooms, and his hand grazes my shoulder in a way that seems both accidental and deliberate. I reach around him to get a mug from the cabinet above the coffee maker, and the space between our bodies becomes electric, charged with possibility. These moments last only seconds, but they stretch out in my mind like hours, playing on repeat long after they've ended. I find myself noticing things about him that I've trained myself to ignore for years. The way his voice gets softer when he's reading lines aloud in his room, practicing for auditions. The curve of his jaw when he's concentrating on homework, chin propped on his hand as he reads. The way he absently runs his fingers through his hair when he's thinking, leaving it messy and disheveled in a way that makes him look younger, more vulnerable. These observations feel dangerous, like gathering evidence for a case I'm not supposed to be building. But I can't stop myself from cataloging them, storing away each detail like a secret I'm keeping even for myself. The charged silence between us becomes most apparent during our usual routines. Movie nights on the couch feel different now. The space between our bodies simultaneously too vast and not nearly enough. When he reaches for the remote, his fingers brush against mine, and neither of us pulls away immediately. When he laughs at something on screen, He turns to look at me, and his eyes linger on my face just a beat too long. One evening, we're making dinner together in our tiny kitchen, navigating around each other in that careful dance we've perfected over months of shared meals. He's chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, while I heat oil in our one decent pan. The movements should be automatic by now, but tonight every interaction feels deliberate, choreographed. When he needs to reach for the soy sauce behind me, his hand settles on my waist to steady himself, and the touch burns through the fabric of my shirt. Sorry, he murmurs, but he doesn't move his hand right away. For a moment, we're frozen like that, his chest almost touching my back, his breath warm against my neck. Then the oil in the pan starts to smoke, and the moment breaks as we both spring into action, salvaging dinner and pretending that nothing unusual just happened. But something did happen. Something is happening every day in these small moments that feel too significant to ignore and too dangerous to acknowledge. Sarah texts him regularly. I can tell because his phone buzzes more frequently than usual, and sometimes he smiles at it in a way that makes my chest tighten with something I refuse to name as jealousy. They have a second date planned for the following weekend, dinner at her place this time. She's going to cook for him, he tells me, and there's something in his voice when he says it that suggests this represents a level of intimacy he's not sure he's ready for. But when he talks about her, his eyes don't light up the way they should. There's an uncertainty there, a hesitancy that goes deeper than normal dating nerves. Sometimes I catch him staring off into space, his expression thoughtful and troubled, like he's trying to work out a problem he can't quite articulate. One night, after too much cheap wine and a movie that neither of us was really watching, he turns to me on the couch and says, "Can I ask you something?" His voice is quiet, almost tentative, and there's something in his eyes that makes my heart race. I tell him he can ask me anything, and I mean it, even though I'm terrified of what the question might be. "Do you ever feel like you're pretending to be someone you're not?" he asks. "Like you're playing a role instead of living your actual life?" The question hangs between us in the dim light of our living room, heavy with implications I'm not sure either of us is ready to explore. Outside, I can hear the distant sound of traffic, the hum of the city that never quite goes to sleep, but inside our small apartment, the silence feels absolute. I don't answer right away because I'm afraid of what my answer might reveal. But finally, I tell him the truth. Every day. I feel like that every day. He nods slowly, and I can see something shift in his expression, some internal barrier crumbling. When he reaches for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine on the couch cushion between us, it doesn't feel like practice anymore. It feels like the beginning of something we're both too afraid to name. The revelation comes on a Saturday afternoon when the rain has been falling steadily for hours, turning the world outside our windows into a gray wash of water and muted light. It's the kind of day that makes you want to stay inside, wrapped in blankets and pretending that nothing exists beyond the four walls of your apartment. We've been doing exactly that, sprawled on our couch with a pile of movies we've both seen too many times, letting the hours drift by in comfortable laziness. Nathaniel canceled his second date with Sarah the night before. Something came up, he told her over the phone, his voice carefully neutral while I pretended not to listen from the kitchen. A family emergency, he said, which wasn't entirely a lie. His grandmother had called earlier in the week, worried about some test results from her doctor, but the crisis had passed by Thursday. Still, Sarah accepted the excuse gracefully, suggesting they reschedule for the following weekend. After he hung up, Nathaniel stood in our kitchen for a long time, staring at his phone with an expression I couldn't read. When I asked if everything was okay, he just nodded and said he thought we should have a movie marathon instead. Something mindless and familiar, he said. Something that wouldn't require too much thinking. So we spent the afternoon watching films we could probably recite from memory, our bodies gradually migrating closer together on the couch until we're sharing the same blanket, our legs tangled beneath the soft fabric. The radiator hums steadily in the corner, fighting against the chill that seeps through our old windows, and the apartment feels smaller than usual, intimate in a way that makes every casual touch feel significant. We're halfway through some romantic comedy from the 90s, something with Hugh Grant being charmingly bumbling, when Nathaniel turns to me during a particularly predictable scene. There's something different in his expression, something more serious than the lazy contentment that's characterized most of our afternoon. "I never thank you," he says quietly, his voice barely audible over the dialogue coming from our ancient television. "For what?" I ask, though I have a feeling I know what he's referring to. My heart starts beating faster, that familiar flutter that seems to happen whenever we get close to discussing what happened in our kitchen. "For helping me practice," he says, but there's something in his tone that suggests he means more than just the technical assistance with kissing. "For being patient with me, for not making it weird." But even as he says it, we both know that it has become weird, or at least different. The easy friendship we've maintained for years has shifted into something more complex, more fraught with possibility and danger. We can both feel it in the way we move around each other now, the way our conversations carry undercurrents of meaning that neither of us is quite ready to acknowledge. I tell him it wasn't a big deal, which is perhaps the biggest lie I've ever told him. Everything about it was a big deal, from the moment he asked to the moment our lips touched to every second that's passed since then. But I don't know how to say that without changing everything between us permanently. The movie continues playing, but neither of us is watching anymore. Nathaniel shifts beside me on the couch, turning so that he's facing me more directly. The movement brings him closer, close enough that I can see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that I can smell his shampoo and the faint scent of the coffee he had with breakfast. "Can I tell you something?" he asks, and there's a vulnerability in his voice that makes my chest tighten. I nod, not trusting myself to speak. "I keep thinking about it," he says. "About that night in the kitchen. I know it was supposed to be practice, but I can't stop thinking about it." The admission hangs between us like a confession, heavy with implications that neither of us has been brave enough to voice until now. On the television, Hugh Grant is probably making some grand romantic gesture, but all I can focus on is the way Nathaniel is looking at me, like he's trying to read something in my expression that I'm not sure I'm ready to reveal. "I've been thinking about it too," I tell him, because pretending otherwise feels impossible now. The words come out rougher than I intended, scraped raw by weeks of trying to push down feelings that refuse to stay buried. Something shifts in his expression when I say it, some last barrier crumbling. Without warning, without preamble or explanation, he leans forward and kisses me. Not hesitantly, not with the nervous uncertainty of someone seeking instruction, but deliberately, purposefully, like someone who knows exactly what they want. This kiss is nothing like the one in the kitchen. There's no pretense of practice, no excuse of preparation for someone else. This kiss is for us, for him, for me. His hand comes up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone. And when I kiss him back, it's with all the longing I've been carrying for months without acknowledging it. When we finally break apart, neither of us moves away. We stay close, foreheads almost touching, breathing the same air. The movie continues playing in the background, but it might as well be in another universe. All that exists is this moment, this couch, this revelation that's been building between us for longer than either of us realized. "This isn't practice anymore," I whisper, echoing the words I spoke in the kitchen, but with a different weight now, a different understanding. "No," he agrees, his voice soft but certain. "It isn't." We sit like that for a long time, close enough to feel each other's heartbeat, letting the truth of it settle between us. Outside, the rain continues to fall, washing the world clean, while inside our small apartment, everything changes. The comfortable friendship we've built over years of shared space and easy companionship has transformed into something entirely different, something that scares me as much as it exhilarates me. On his phone, Sarah's contact information glows with unanswered messages, plans for dates that will never happen, expectations that will need to be gently disappointed. But for now, in this moment, there's only us, only this recognition of something that was always there waiting to be acknowledged. When Nathaniel takes my hand, intertwining our fingers on the blanket between us, it feels like the most natural thing in the world and the most revolutionary act imaginable. The weight of what we've begun crashes down over the following days like a slow-motion avalanche, each moment bringing new awareness of how dramatically our world has shifted. We wake up on Sunday morning still tangled together on the couch, the television displaying a blue screen where our forgotten movie marathon ended hours ago. For a few disoriented seconds, neither of us moves, existing in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness where yesterday's revelations feel like something that might have been a dream. But when Nathaniel's eyes flutter open and meet mine, the reality of it hits us both at once. This is real. This thing between us, this transformation of friendship into something deeper and more dangerous, actually happened. His hair is messy from sleep, sticking up at odd angles, and there's a crease on his cheek from where it was pressed against the couch cushion. He looks young and vulnerable and heartbreakingly beautiful, and the urge to reach out and smooth down his hair is so strong it makes my chest ache. We disentangle ourselves carefully, moving with the awkward politeness of people who aren't sure what the new rules are between them. Coffee gets made in relative silence, both of us navigating our tiny kitchen with more care than usual, hyper-aware of every accidental touch and meaningful glance. When our fingers brush as he hands me my mug, the contact feels electric, loaded with significance that neither of us knows how to process. The outside world intrudes gradually, relentlessly. Sarah texts Nathaniel again, asking about rescheduling their date. Her messages bright and cheerful and completely oblivious to the seismic shift that's occurred in our apartment. Each buzz of his phone makes him flinch slightly, and I watch him read her messages with an expression that grows more pained with each word. Friends call, wanted to make plans for the weekend. Our graphic design professor emails about a project deadline that I've completely forgotten about in the emotional chaos of the past few days. The ordinary machinery of our lives continues turning, demanding attention and responses and decisions, while we exist in this suspended state of not knowing what we are to each other anymore. By Wednesday, the tension has become almost unbearable. We're both trying to pretend that everything is normal while simultaneously being unable to ignore the fundamental change between us. Simple interactions become loaded with meaning. When he asks me to pass him the salt at dinner, his fingers linger against mine when he takes it. When I'm studying at the kitchen table and he comes to get water from the refrigerator, he pauses behind my chair, his presence warm and solid at my back. But we don't talk about it. We don't address the elephant in the room or acknowledge that Saturday afternoon on the couch or discuss what any of it means for our friendship, our living situation, our futures. The silence grows heavier each day, pressing down on us like atmospheric pressure before a storm. The breaking point comes on Thursday night. I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of Nathaniel moving around in his room next door when I hear his phone ring. Through the thin walls, I can hear his side of the conversation, his voice carefully bright as he talks to Sarah. Yes, he tells her, this weekend would be perfect. Dinner sounds great. He's looking forward to it too. When he hangs up, the silence that follows is deafening. I can picture him sitting on the edge of his bed, phone still in his hands, staring at it with that same pained expression he's been wearing all week. The knowledge that he's agreed to go out with her again sits in my stomach like a stone, heavy and indigestible. I can't do this anymore. I can't lie here pretending that hearing him make plans with someone else doesn't feel like having my chest cracked open. I can't keep existing in this liminal space where we're something more than friends, but not brave enough to admit what that something might be. Before I can lose my nerve, I get up and walk to his room. The door is slightly ajar, and through the gap I can see him sitting exactly as I imagined, hunched over his phone with his head in his hands. He looks up when I knock softly on the doorframe, and the expression on his face is so raw, so conflicted, that it takes my breath away. We need to talk, I say, and he nods like he's been waiting for me to say exactly that. I push the door open wider and step into his room, which feels simultaneously familiar and foreign. I've been in here countless times over the months we've lived together, borrowing textbooks and returning clothes and having late-night conversations about everything and nothing. But tonight, the space between us feels charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. Tell me what this means, I say, my voice steadier than I feel. Tell me if you want me to stop pretending that nothing has changed between us. Tell me if you want to go back to being just friends and forget that any of this happened. But even as I say the words, I know that going back is impossible. We've crossed too many lines, acknowledged too much truth. There's no returning to the easy companionship we once shared, no matter how much safer that might be. Nathaniel looks at me for a long moment, his brown eyes searching my face like he's trying to memorize every detail. When he finally speaks, his voice cracks with emotion. I can't pretend anymore either, he says. I don't want to go back to being just friends. I don't want to go on that date with Sarah tomorrow night. I don't want to spend another day acting like this thing between us isn't the most real thing I've ever felt. The admission hangs between us in his small room, brave and terrifying and beautiful in its honesty. Outside, the world continues its relentless forward motion, but inside this space we've created, time feels suspended. When he reaches for my hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they intertwine with mine, I know we've made our choice. We're choosing honesty over safety, possibility over certainty. We're choosing each other, even though we don't know what that means or where it will lead us. The phone on his nightstand buzzes with another message from Sarah, but neither of us looks at it. For the first time in days, the silence between us doesn't feel heavy with unspoken words. It feels peaceful, settled, like the quiet after a storm has finally passed. The apartment settles into a different kind of quiet after our conversation in his room. Not the charged silence that has haunted us for weeks, heavy with unspoken truths and careful distances, but something softer, more settled. The air itself feels different, cleaner somehow, as if the truth has swept away the accumulated dust of pretense and uncertainty. We don't make grand declarations or dramatic gestures. There are no sweeping pronouncements about love or forever or any of the things that movies have taught us should accompany moments like this. Instead, we exist in the simplicity of honesty, in the relief of finally being able to look at each other without hiding what we see. Nathaniel calls Sarah the next morning. I'm in the kitchen making coffee when I hear his voice through the thin wall of his bedroom, careful and kind as he explains that he can't make dinner tonight, that he's realized he's not in a place where he can date anyone right now. It's not you, he tells her, and I can hear the sincerity in his voice even from the next room. You're wonderful. I'm just figuring some things out. When he emerges from his room 20 minutes later, his eyes are slightly red, but his shoulders look lighter, as if he's set down a burden he didn't realize he was carrying. He accepts the coffee I offer him with a small smile, and when our fingers touch around the mug, neither of us pulls away quickly. We're learning new rules for touching, new boundaries for closeness, and every contact feels both familiar and revolutionary. The weekend passes quietly. We don't venture far from our apartment, content to exist in our small world of shared space and gradually shifting dynamics. Saturday afternoon finds us back on our couch, but this time, when we migrate toward each other during the movie, it feels intentional rather than accidental. When Nathaniel's head ends up on my shoulder halfway through some thriller we're not really watching, he doesn't pretend it happened by accident or make jokes to diffuse the intimacy of it. Instead, he turns his face slightly toward my neck and says quietly, "This feels right." And it does. For all the uncertainty about what we're becoming, for all the questions about how this will change our friendship and our living situation and our futures, this moment feels absolutely right. His weight against my side, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way my hand finds its way into his hair without conscious thought, all of it feels like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd been searching for. We order takeout for dinner, spreading containers across our coffee table and eating with plastic forks while some documentary about marine life plays in the background. Our conversation is easy, natural, touching on everything from the ridiculous amount of homework we both have due Monday to whether we should finally fix the leaky faucet that's been driving us crazy for months. The ordinariness of it is perfect, proof that this change between us doesn't have to mean the destruction of everything we've built together. But there are moments when the magnitude of what we've chosen hits me with surprising force. When Nathaniel laughs at something on the television and looks at me to see if I'm laughing too, the warmth in his eyes is different now, deeper, more intentional. When he gets up to throw away our empty containers and his hand trails across my shoulder as he passes behind the couch, the touch lingers in a way that speaks to new permissions we've granted each other. As the evening grows later and the documentary gives way to late-night talk show reruns, we find ourselves lying down on the couch, my back against the armrest and Nathaniel stretched out with his head pillowed on my chest. The position should feel awkward. We're both too tall for our small couch, but instead it feels perfect, intimate in a way that has nothing to do with sex and everything to do with trust. His breathing gradually slows and deepens, and I realize he's falling asleep. For a moment, I consider waking him, suggesting we move to our respective beds like responsible adults who have early classes tomorrow. But the weight of him against me feels too precious to disturb, and the contentment radiating from his relaxed body tells me he needs this rest, this peace, this safety. On his nightstand in the other room, his phone sits silent and dark. There are no more texts from Sarah, no more reminders of the path he chose not to take. The absence of that particular anxiety has left space for something else to grow between us, something that doesn't have a name yet, but feels like the beginning of everything. I let my eyes drift closed, one hand resting on his back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his ribs. Outside our windows, the city continues its endless movement. Cars passing on the street below, people walking home from late dinners and evening shifts, the whole complicated machinery of other people's lives spinning forward into the night. But inside our apartment, time feels suspended, crystallized into this single moment of peace. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't know how to navigate the complexities of transforming a friendship into something more, how to tell our friends and families, how to balance this new intimacy with the practical realities of shared rent and conflicting schedules and the thousand small negotiations that come with living in each other's pockets. But we know this: the weight of his body against mine, the sound of his breathing in the dark apartment, the way my hand fits perfectly in the space between his shoulder blades. We know the relief of finally being honest, the peace that comes with choosing each other over safety, over certainty, over all the easier paths we could have taken. In a few hours, we'll wake up stiff and cramped from sleeping on the couch, and we'll have to figure out how to be whatever we're becoming in the bright light of Monday morning. But for now, we exist in this perfect suspension of time and possibility, two people who finally stopped pretending they were just friends. The apartment is quiet around us, filled with the sacred silence of truth finally spoken.